Hi there, and welcome to another edition of BookTrib Live. Today, our guest is Joan Kingsley. We're very excited to have her. She's fresh off the plane from the UK, so we're happy to have her here on BookTrib.com. She's now somewhere in New York City or maybe Long Island at the moment. Today, Joan is the author of the fearfree, organization, which is a fascinating book. She wrote the book along with Paul Brown and Sue Patterson. She is a psychotherapist and an author, and we're very pleased to have her here today. The secondary title of this book is Vital Insights from Neuroscience to Transform Your Business Culture. Joan, welcome so much to BookTrib.com. Thanks for being here.
And thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Can you tell us a little bit about the motivation behind writing the book, which is such a fascinating topic?
Well, it goes back a long way in my life. When I was living in New York, although I live in London, I'm married to an Englishman. I am a New Yorker, and my daughter was at school in New York, and somebody was coming to do a lecture. Someone named Jane Leahy, I think is her name. And the book was called Your Child's Growing Mind. And it was really addressing parents about children develop uniquely and differently. And it all has to do with the brain development, that some children make those connections earlier than others. That's why some children are late starters. And that really lit a spark for me. So that must have been 1987, I guess. And then I was studying to be a psychotherapist. I met Paul Brown. So I did all of this later in life. We moved back to London. And I met Paul Brown, and he was just doing a big project for British Telecom. And I took him my dissertation to read. And he said, "Wow, you are a terrific writer. Why don't you come and work with me and do some writing for BT?" At the same time, Daniel Goleman had just written Emotional Intelligence, which was very exciting. There were
Was
loads
that in the
of
eight? That was, what year was that though? That was later.
late
I mean, that was
80s. Yeah.
late. Was
So
it really
we were
late 80s?
jumping. Yeah, yeah, we're
Okay.
jumping.
All right.
Or maybe it was the 90s. I'm trying to
I
think.
thought it was a little later because that was
Yeah.
really groundbreaking.
Yes, it was groundbreaking, and his book was based on research being done by Joseph Ledoux. And Joseph Ledoux is a neuroscientist, and he did all of the cutting edge research on fear pathways in the brain, the fear emotion, and the hardwiring in the brain that takes a fear stimulus and how it gets transported into the brain to these little bits, little pieces called the amygdala, which are almond shaped,
Right.
amygdala meaning almond. And the amygdala is the emotional storehouse of memories. Emotional memories are stored in the amygdala. But the amygdala also responds to fear stimulus. And it responds in entirely dramatic ways. So it's all the fight, flight, freeze mechanisms and the neurochemicals that cascade through your body. And then he identified this quick and dirty route to the amygdala so that an emotion, and particularly fear, happens to you before you have time to think about it or even know it's happening. And from an evolutionary perspective, that is an incredibly good idea because that means we go into survival mode and can survive. Nanoseconds later, there's another pathway through to the cognitive, the thinking brain. And that's where we make sense of what's happening. So emotions are very pure things, and fear is very pure, and we've all felt fear, and I think we all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
If
sure.
something scares you, it just scares you. And it's the same for anger, and it's the same for joy. These emotions they're come from the most ancient parts of our brain, the reptilian brain. And so the reptilian brain obviously evolved many, billions of years before the thinking brain did in mammals and then in human beings. So mammals have maybe a very simple cognitive structures in their brain. We're not sure, but it seems certainly if you have a pet, you know that you think they're aware of certain things. But in human beings, we have language, we can plan, we can remember, we can use our memories to plan for our futures. So anyway, this was all very exciting stuff that was coming out with the advent of MRI scanners, because then they could study brains as they were living and thinking and doing and responding, and learned a huge amount. And Daniel Goleman, who was the science editor of the New York Times, took all of this information. And he was very clever and created this wonderful book, which really changed the world of work, the world for everybody who wanted to pay attention to what he was talking about. That being emotionally intelligent was profoundly more important than having IQ.
I think that book gave people the permission to acknowledge that they had emotions and feelings that went along with being at work.
Yes.
And that was a whole brand new thinking.
All these many years later, I mean, we're now, 2015, and people are still struggling with these concepts. How can emotions, how can they be hardwired in the brain? People still want to place emotions in some kind of otherworldly sphere, spiritual sphere. Actually, emotions are very physical things. We feel them in our bodies. We can read when somebody's in the grip of an emotion. I mean, Darwin wrote a book called The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals, or Mammals. And he was studying the expression of emotions across species and across cultures, and they are common. But people really have a hard time with that.
How, given that you talk about a fear-free organization, saying that many organizations are run by fear and with fear, how damaging is that to people you work with in terms of running your department or your company with, around a fear technique?
I think what's important is to discriminate between stress, anxiety, and pure fear. So we all need some stress in order to perform. I mean, an actor will tell you that. They cannot go on stage and give a good performance if there isn't some nervous tension going on. And then there's anxiety, which begins to tip over into getting worried, and for an actor, potential stage fright. And then when you go right into fear, that becomes crippling and just freezes
Paralyzing.
you up. So it's important to make those distinctions, because people will say quite rightly, well, we need some anxiety, we need some stress in business. How would we ever get anything done? And that's absolutely true. But what you don't want is to trigger into fear systems, because then what a manager is doing is tapping into, instead of the thriving mode, the energy that helps us thrive, they're tapping into the surviving mode, where people are going into the fight, flight, freeze mechanisms. And so people, if you are trying to survive, that's all you're going to be focused on. You're trying to be creative, but you're supposed to create something. But all you're thinking about is, how do I please my boss? How do I get him to stop, bullying me, or she stop bullying me? And what do I do to keep my job? And forget about creativity. Then you start, I'll just do what pleases my boss, even if I know I don't agree, or I think there's something wrong. And the worst case scenario is the example of the Challenger shuttle, because you get cover-ups in that way. If you're afraid to tell the truth, if you're afraid to be open and honest, and if you feel you're not trusted, then you start covering up, and you tell your boss what they want to hear. And from the manager's perspective, the leader's perspective, that is very, very bad business. It may be good short-term strategies, and you may think you're getting a lot done, but actually you're destroying your business. Businesses don't survive through the long term on fear.
Would you characterize that as being bullied? What's the difference between being bullied at work and, kind of instilling fear, or is that, sort of the same thing? When does it become bullying?
Bullying is a very particular behavior that, I mean, some managers are bullies. Most people are not bullies, fortunately, but some managers are. And bullying is generally directed at an individual. So, for whatever reason, the person running the team or the department or the organization just doesn't like somebody, wants to get rid of them. And all the nastiness and anger comes out at that person. You also have people who are very dysfunctional, who just bully everybody. And that's another situation. And remember, people are promoted not because they're good with people. People get promoted because they produce results. And I can't tell you the number of people I have seen professionally who say, look, I'm now running a team. I don't know what I'm doing. I know how to do branding and I know how to do strategy, but I don't know anything about people and I don't know what to say and what to do. So, people want to do the best they can, but when they're placed in a position where their job depends on running a team and running it well and cracking the whip, it's very easy to resort to fear tactics because fear is the easiest emotion to trigger in another human being.
Mm.
Much easier than love and joy.
Right. Well, do you feel that love and joy is trusted? I mean, if you have a manager who is trying to cultivate you and asks your opinion, is that trusted? I mean, is that something that sometimes creates fear and has like sort of a backlash effect?
It depends on the culture you're working in. And, trust develops in the context of a relationship. And relationships need work. Relationships just, I mean, of course, sometimes you meet somebody and you just like them and you have chemistry. And oh, if
Right.
all the world were like that, but it's not. And we go to work, it's like you can't choose your family. You can choose your friends. You can't choose the people you work with. And so
Right.
you have to find ways, and particularly, people in positions of authority have to find ways to create relationships and to get people from diverse backgrounds and cultures and intellects relating with each other and trusting each other. And then the trust grows. But as soon as fear steps in, trust is gone. And once trust goes, it's very, very difficult to rebuild. Once somebody's
That's hard to
broken your
get.
trust. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you write this book for CEOs, for middle management, for general people working in the workforce? Who's the ideal audience for the book?
The ideal audience are managers and leaders, but it's really written for anybody. But we want managers to understand and leaders to understand this is what you are doing. These are not good strategies for managing your people. And so we
So, I
really
mean,
want,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was saying the book also builds awareness, right? So if you are new in management, you could read this book and start to understand pitfalls, things to watch out for. It
Absolutely.
builds awareness. Yeah.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the way you treat people, and things like how do you run a meeting, and we work with a woman named Nancy Klein, who's American, lives in London, has written a book called Time to Think and More Time to Think. And she has a wonderful way of getting the best out of people by listening. And so we want managers and people moving up into management to learn how to listen, to learn, yeah.
No, I was going to say listening is underrated. I mean, I think in our culture today, we're listening a lot less because we're so overwhelmed with and distracted. So
Yes,
getting into a listening program and reminding yourself to listen is something that, might be a new mantra for
yes.
managers.
And also an interrupted thought is an assassinated thought. So when you
Mm.
interrupt somebody and you're not letting somebody finish what they're trying to say, you're planting your thoughts into their brain and you're interfering with a decision-making process, a creative process. And also the way meetings are run. I mean, how often have we all been at meetings where three people are speaking and everybody else is afraid to talk? And in a good fear-free meeting, you have, first of all, only the people who are relevant to the meeting are invited to
Mm.
the meeting. So you don't have, 20 people. We tell a story of I think a general in the book who she had a supply meeting, and many people turned up, and she asked each person. Sorry, I've just lost my screen. Here we go.
Oh, I can see you.
Yeah, okay. She asked each person, why are you here? And person after person, she said, thank you very much, you can leave. And she wound up with the 10 relevant people at the meeting. So really learning how to run meetings, not having too many meetings, giving everybody a chance to speak up at a meeting, having meetings focused on agenda points, not just letting meetings ramble on, which, I mean, I go to many meetings where that happens. And it's quite frustrating for people. People come out of those meetings feeling like they haven't been heard, they haven't been listened to, and then you wind up with little mini meetings after the meetings, little groups that form. Well, I wanted to say this, and why didn't we talk about this? And you get these subcultures in
Mm.
organizations. So learning how to listen and learning how to ask the right questions and learning how to give everybody a chance to have a voice. Also, what doesn't get paid enough attention to is hiring the right people. Recruitment is essential. If you
Mm.
have hired the right person for the right job, you're going to get the best out of them. If you've hired somebody because whatever reason, somebody's recommended them and you feel they're not right, but you hire them anyway, you're going to have a hard time. So recruitment is essential. And then in terms of people going into organizations, you really need to know what the culture is of the company you're going to work for. So you need to be asking questions when you are looking for a job.
So we talk a lot about culture in the workplace. And how does one who's interviewing for a job, how do you determine what fairly quickly, because if you have maybe you have two interviews, maybe at a bigger company you might have three or four. How do you determine the culture that you're walking into and that you're getting involved in?
Well, it's very interesting as soon as you walk through the door, as soon as you make a phone call, how somebody speaks to you, how they answer the phone tells you and gives you an enormous amount of information. You walk in the door, look around, listen to the silence, listen to what's going on in the waiting room. Is the person the receptionist, are they attentive? Are they polite? That'll give you a lot of hints about what's going on in the wider organization. Then
Mm.
you can do some detective work. You can go, if you know anybody who works in the organization, call them up, find out what it's like. Go to Starbucks on the corner, sit and listen. Try and ride up in the elevator if you can. So try and gather information about the organization.
Mm.
It's a bit
So
like
do
when
you,
you buy a house. If you
right,
walk in and it doesn't feel right, it's not right.
right, absolutely. So do your own research.
Yes.
How does having a happy workforce improve productivity in general? Now, that may seem like a simple question, but it's really not.
How does it? Well, people are just more productive when they're happy. I saw I think there was an article today in the New York Times or somewhere that happy people live longer, are healthier and are much more productive and creative. You know, so much of creativity happens in eureka moments. And
I was
eureka
going to ask, that
moments,
was yes, let's talk
yeah,
about that.
eureka moments happen when your brain is kind of relaxed and you're not trying to come up with an answer. You've looked at the problem, you've thought about it, and then go for a walk, play solitaire, and suddenly your brain just
Right.
explodes with ideas. It happens to me all the time.
Right. You have to let yourself relax for a moment in order to
So
get there.
important. Yeah.
Right.
And I think in terms of space in organizations, there really should be quiet places for people to go to be able to think. You know, people who are creative, particularly people who write documents and have to read, they get punished because they're not seen to be working.
Mm.
So in organizations where that is important, the report writing and the reading, those organizations should be creating safe spaces, quiet
That's a good point.
spaces for thinking.
And things have changed so much because it used to be you judge how busy a company was by the phones ringing and people
Yeah,
talking on the phones, and that's just not the case anymore. So
yeah.
it's a different environment.
I was somewhere last night I was sitting next to an architect at a dinner, and we were talking about using headphones at work. And they were having a great debate in their office about whether they should allow headphones or not. I said, well, why not let people decide for themselves whether they want to use headphones? But he felt it was important to make a rule, particularly for young people coming in, young architects and apprentices. And he felt that when people wear headphones, they zone out of everything, and they're not interacting with each other. They're not sparking off of each other. And I thought those were very, very good, valid points. You know, the exciting thing about writing this book is the conversations I get into with people. It's wonderful.
What have they said? Are they immediately intrigued? If you're just tuning in, I mean, we're talking to Joan Kingsley, and she's the author of the Fear-Free Organization. What are the kind of things you're hearing, Joan, from people?
Well, people occasionally, particularly people who are in the world of newspapers, journalism, media, they think they need fear in their environments. I would say they need stress. They feed off stress. Um, but by and large, people really respond instantly to the title, the Fear-Free Organization. They just get it. And people do not want to go to work and be afraid and be tired and feel drained. And, I don't know about Wall Street because I live in London, but I do know when I travel into the city of London and I see all these young people in their black suits, men and women, and their black shoes, and I don't see many smiles. That is a sadness. When I went to work, I was excited about my job when I was, in my early 20s. It was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I hope, getting to work and being on the tube or the subway is not a pleasant experience, so maybe that's what you're seeing. But, I think I want to bring up one more word that's very popular today, and it's engagement.
Hmm.
Relationships and then engagement of sort of developing a relationship where there is this engagement, where there is this dialogue from one to another. And
Hmm.
we talk a lot, that's the big word now. It's like, are we getting engagement? Are we getting engagement from our customers, from our clients, from our consumers, and inside our own workforce? Are we engaging? Are we really developing a relationship? How does an organization, should they promote the staff getting together just to maybe do a community activity or have lunch together or do something together that builds team building? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think some team building is wonderful, and some team building I would run a mile from. I do not want to go out and climb mountains, and some people really, really don't connect with that. Other people do. Some people
Right.
love going on these, weekends away and being challenged and competing. But I think, it depends on the organization and what the tempo is like. I mean, I haven't heard of an organization, there probably are some out there, who have choirs. What a wonderful thing to do with people. Why not have, choirs? Why not have dancing? There are other ways to team build. You don't have to go, walk a tightrope. I had a phone call last week from somebody who told me she works for the government or had worked for the government. And the things they were asked to do really to put their lives at risk to prove that, they could be courageous and they could be an example to the people they worked with. And you talk about engagement. Engagement to me means energy. It means connection. It means that your brain and my brain are making some kind of connection. And that's so powerfully important in the work I do, the psychotherapeutic work I do. Anytime I am with somebody, there's something happening in the middle of the room that changes me and changes the other person. There's an energy, there's a vibe. Engagement is, I think, is another word for that.
So that vibe and that energy that happens between two people, sometimes people don't recognize it for what it is, but would you say that it's very powerful to observe it and start to understand what's happening so that you don't ignore it, but learn from it and develop from it, to know that person who you're sitting across from, or to feel that vibe? And is it smart to acknowledge what's going on, or is it smarter just to sort of stay quiet?
Well, you're talking about empathy, really. And empathy starts with knowing oneself. So empathy starts with insight. I have to know myself. I get up in the morning. How am I feeling? What's going on inside of me? What am I taking into my workplace or into my friendships or any relationship? And then to be very sensitive to other people. Once you are in touch with yourself, I hate those psychobabble words, but there we go. Once you're connected to yourself, then you easily connect to other people. And some people, somebody could have had something really terrible happen to them. They don't want to talk about it at work. But you can say, I can see maybe there's something going on for you today. Maybe you don't want to talk about it, but, I'm here if you want to. Or I can see something's making you angry. Is it something I've done? Do you want to talk about it? So it's keeping those communication networks open, which opens up all the connections in the brain. And the brain is buzzing and doing all sorts of exciting things all the time. Unfortunately, not when we're feeling afraid. Then things are shutting down and focusing on survival mechanisms.
It's amazing. What you're saying is so simple, not easy to do, but it's simple to acknowledge your feelings, acknowledge what's going on around you, and actually speak it with language. And if you can articulate it, it changes the tenor. It changes what if certainly if somebody's angry or whatever, and you just start discussing it, it really does change what's going on. It changes the dynamic. So it's really interesting. It's very interesting. And so, in closing, if you wanted to leave our viewers with something, what would that be, Joan?
I think try and find a passion in your life. Try and find something to do that gives you joy. That you get up in the morning, and even if it's a bad hair day, you're looking forward. You're seeing things rather than seeing them as problems. You're seeing challenge. So try and find your passion if you can. That to me is the greatest.
Excellent. That's a great place to end. Again, we've been talking to Joan Kingsley, and the book is The Fear-Free Organization. Thanks so much for being with us today, Joan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Have a wonderful day.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.